Hello, I'm Aubni, and in this series I will show you the process through which I go to make a minigame. The game that I'll be making consists of multiple minigames all at once, so it is a great opportunity to showcase different types of games that you can make, the problems to avoid when making them, and tricks I've come up with over time to make them more enjoyable. If you want to know more about the whole minigame, I suggest you watch the first episode of this series where I give a description of the entire project. In this episode, we will be taking a look at mazes and all the things you need to take into consideration when creating one. First, let's take a look at the number of dimensions that your maze will be built in and what Minecraft can bring to each kind. Two-dimensional mazes are the most basic types, but it doesn't mean that they are less fun. They are by far the most simple to design and build, but they are also the ones that can get the most out of the complexity that Minecraft can bring to mazes. Weave mazes, also called 2.5D mazes, are just like their 2D counterparts, but they also have tunnels or bridges that link different parts. They can add a lot of complexity depending on where you place the entry points to those tunnels or bridges. Other than that, they can be treated just like 2D mazes. Three-dimensional mazes can be a lot harder by themselves already, but the presence of gravity allows for an easy way to make unidirectional corridors. You can also include ladders or vines, or even make the maze underwater for a different kind of navigation. Considering that all three dimensions will be taken to navigate through the maze, it will be a lot harder to include more of the complexity that Minecraft can bring to mazes. For the rest of this episode, I will keep the focus on 2D mazes, however. For these ones, I would suggest starting with the structure of the maze. The square cell structure is the easiest and most obvious one to build in Minecraft's geometry. With this one, you simply make a grid of blocks and then add the walls. You can play around with the size of the cells and the thickness of the walls, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward. You can still pick other shapes of cells like triangles, hexagons, linear mazes, or even reject the restriction of cell-based mazes and go for a freestyle design. These mazes can be very interesting to make, but will probably need to be a bit less compact than square-celled mazes. Minecraft's mechanics, especially the versatility of redstone, allow you to add a lot of complexity to mazes. Example of mechanics that you can include in a maze to add some variation can be using pistons or carpets over fences to make an invisible maze, changing the layout of the maze after some specific actions, adding one-way corridors, integrating elements of other types of games like parkour or target shooting, and as always, any other thing you can think of. Then you can think of the difficulty of your maze. The first thing you need to choose when you want to decide on the difficulty is where to place the exit of your maze. Mazes with an exit on the side can always be solved by following a wall. If you put the exit in the middle and make a loop around it, however, players will need to use other tricks. Another thing that you can take into consideration is the ratio of the area that will be part of the right path compared to the total area of the maze. In other words, if a player takes the wrong path, how much time do you want them to waste? The last thing that I can suggest if you want to make your maze more difficult is the addition of repeated patterns. The goal here is to get your players to think they are somewhere they are not. It can be quite hard to pull off, but if you do, it will greatly increase the difficulty level of your maze. To conclude the more theoretical part of this video, I'll share a few tricks I learned over time to make mazes more optimal. They will probably seem very obvious, but these things can easily happen when placing blocks randomly without paying much attention to them. First, I'd suggest you always place the exit or the goals of the maze first, and then you start building from there. You should also avoid creating long, straight paths that show the goal itself, since it wastes space that could instead be used to explore. Same thing for dead ends. From the point that it is visible, it should be the shortest length possible. Anything longer will waste space. You should never create wrong paths that are only accessible after the exit is in sight. Since no one will take them, they will be a waste of space. As I mentioned, these tricks might have sounded ridiculously obvious when I said them, but I've seen these things happen by accident in many mazes, including some that I made myself, so I'd rather share them and sound stupid than keep them to myself and see those problems in mazes. Now let's take a look at the maze that will be included in the Siege Simulator. This maze will represent a series of tunnels under the castle where the invader can plant some explosives to make things easier for them and harder for their opponent. There will be 4 different goals, each one giving a specific bonus. Since this maze will be part of a larger game, I chose to make it quite simple with all 4 goals on the sides. But since I expect players to get used to the layout pretty quickly, I decided to add a small element of surprise. Each time the invader claims a bonus, it will block off some paths, some randomly and some consistently. For example, when the player claims the bonus identified by the brown wool, it will always push this block here and either this one or this one. That way, the more bonuses you get, the less paths you have to leave the maze. All this is done pretty easily with some redstone wiring and some randomizers. I decided on the positions of the blocks that are pushed by splitting the maze in multiple sections. One for each goal, each with 2 entry points, and one with many paths linking them all to the exit. Activating one goal will randomly close one of its exits and block off a path in the main part of the maze. So this is it for the maze part of the Siege Simulator. In the next episode, we will be taking a look at minecart mazes and how they will be implemented in my game. I hope you enjoyed and see you in the next one.